blindness and borders happen in Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. It's almost time, man. Everything about to change. That's the real. The truth about to be revealed. Come on. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about that time that the whole world find out who he is, putting unbearable burdens on the backs of our kids. I finally found out why they hate me so. Got me locked up in cells and won't let me go. Separate me from my woman, multiply no more. Same thing was done in Egypt by the rule of Pharaoh. They say this people of Israel multiply like the sands. Let's kill it firstborn and tie all their hands. Lest they become better than us. Uproar and revolt and scatter our guts. So on came the conspiracy to kill Israel. 2006 up in America, their plan is well. Got my city popping birth control just like Skittles. Telling them to avoid what they carry in the middle. My people, a nation that be scattered and peeled. Soon the curse gonna be lifted, we gon' all know the deal. That's right. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change.
Why do the heathens rage? And the people them imagine vain things. The kings of the earth and the rulers seek counsel. Them speak the words, but it shall not amount to. It's murder. Boy, the streets full of blood. No love. These killers full your body with slugs. Them now budge. How you can want me pimps and thugs. Me beg you teach your daughters and your sons. As prophesied, them want kill off me nation. King Alfred and him friend them a plot extermination. Operation lockdown, but how me people no see. Soldier man and policeman them a flood the streets. World a suffer then, because of famine in the land just for the bread of life. But nothing no really overstand, me tell them get it right. Still them don't give a damn, sing praises to I am that I am. Hey yo.
Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. And time came for the saints to possess a kingdom. Yeah, yeah. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. Life as we know it is about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change. It's about to change.
Now stay tuned for our featured presentation.
Another edition of Beyond the Surface. This is Dawid Ben Yisrael, and once again, we're glad that you could tune in. We're coming to you live from the Cultural Center of the New Covenant Congregation of Israel, and we appreciate you tuning in. Hopefully, you've had a chance to do some research after our last program, and we're going to take you on yet another journey, and hopefully, you're prepared because this is the big one. We're going to discuss Easter, and we know many of you have your plans all set. Your family get-togethers are all planned, but we're going to try and give you an understanding of where the Easter celebration comes from. You'd be surprised to find out that it really isn't based in the Bible at all, not the way that you believe it is. And we're going to try and unearth some things for you, and hopefully you're prepared. You've got your pen, you got your paper, you got your Bible, and maybe your history book. And, get ready, because this is going to be quite a ride, I hope. We've got on the panel with me, I've got my esteemed panelist, Sister Johanna Bat Yisrael.
Shalom.
Shalom, how are you?
Fine.
Okay, and my brother, Yirmiyahu Ben Yisrael.
Shalom, brother.
Late edition, but welcome. I kind of gave them that teaser to let them know that this thing that is called Easter is really not based in what they think it is. The Bible is where most of the days are set. The year has begun. People are starting to get the spring fever where they see things are starting to rejuvenate, the trees, the birds, everything is starting to come to life. And they've got this celebration that they are used to keeping, and they really believe that this is a celebration that is based in as basically it's the most important Christian day of the year, because this is when, in their belief, this is when the Messiah, I don't want to call him in the wrong name, makes a miraculous rebirth. Now, that happens, and that we do have scriptural evidence of that in the Bible, but then there's this thing, Easter. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk a little bit very briefly because, people base their belief system, they believe themselves to be Christians, and they base that off the Bible. But the Bible talks about holy days, but it doesn't talk about holidays. As a matter of fact, the word Easter is only mentioned one time in the Bible. But then you've got a constant mentioning of these holy days that the children of Israel kept. So what I wanted to do is talk a little bit about, the beginnings of where, Easter came from, where these pagan rituals came from, and then start understanding why people do what they do. So let's get you going with first and foremost, where did these, why do people keep the traditions of men?
It's interesting. What we have is people tend to not like change. That's one thing. So we get into routines. And, after the Council of Nicaea, and I think it was 325 AD, they had a routine for these pagans and these Christians that were newly formed at that particular time.
Right.
And even back in the day, we know that Israel was used to a routine. In fact, the God of Israel set us up in a routine so that we'd have a way to kind of be able to measure our lives, go about how to conduct ourselves. It gives a sense of order.
Right.
What happens is if you get the wrong information and you get into a routine around that, then starts coming in all this wickedness and heresy. And actually, I'm going to read a little bit out of Matthew chapter 15. We're going to base this so that you can see scripturally, this is how the ancient people of Israel actually got off into some of the traditions of men. This is Matthew chapter 15, and we're just going to read verses 1 through 6 here. Let me go ahead and grab that, give the audience some time. But that's
Matthew 15, you said, right?
Matthew chapter 15.
Okay.
This nice book here. You see my page is a little crinkly, and that's the way all our books should be, because that's the reason is that we're supposed to read this book to show ourselves approved. We'll read every novel. We got people out there buying Kindles.
They'll read the whole thing.
They'll get a Mac
Cover to
iPad.
cover.
They'll read
Right.
the newspaper. They'll read Jet. They'll read E-Magazine and all of that stuff. Cover to cover, every advertisement, every joke, every tittle.
You'll find people, I'm sorry for interrupting you, but you'll find people that have the dream books. And the way that you said that, our books are worn and you've been well read, and that's how they should be. That's how oftentimes dream books are done.
Exactly.
And these dream books are truly nothing but astrology, and in addition to all other types of of witchcraft and such, that we were told in the scriptures not to deal with.
But no religion.
None.
Right.
None.
Right.
I mean, you get tarot cards or something. I mean, that book is tattered. But this book, you go into a lot of Christian houses, it is pristine. They won't even let dust. They shine it like furniture.
Let's get to it.
Okay, so then Matthew chapter 15, verse 1. Then came to Yeshua scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, why do your disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? Here's the tradition. For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. When he answered and said unto them, this is Yeshua now answering them, why do you also transgress the commandment of Elohim? This is Yahweh Elohim, by your tradition. For Elohim commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother. And he that curses father or mother, let him die to death. But you say, whoever shall say to his father or mother, it is a gift, by whatsoever you mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. So now you're just vacating the very law that Yahweh has set up. Okay? This, thus have you made the commandment of Elohim of non-effect by your tradition. You hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, this people draws near unto me with their mouth and honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me.
Right.
But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men.
Right. So they're the commandments of men as opposed to the commandments of Yah.
Right.
The 10 Commandments, and also the culture of Yah, which is steeped in the not traditions, but the 10 Commandments, the holy days, all of the things that were supposed to be passed on by the 12 tribes of the children of Israel, so that the rest of the world would know what to do and how to do these things, so that they would be in alignment with nature and with the Most High. Sister Johanna, where did all this stuff come from? I mean, because the Bible is one of the earliest collection of books, but interestingly enough, when Yeshua was around, there was no New Testament. Okay, so they obviously weren't basing anything off of the New Testament writings. Everything had to have been based off of something before that. But a lot of the things that people do that are related to Easter predate Yeshua himself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, that's exactly the question to ask when you think about where did these traditions come from? When you go through the scriptures, and you know, especially I implore people to oftentimes get a search engine, utilize search engines throughout the scriptures to get a better understanding of certain things. If you do such things as that, if you do searches on things like the nation of Israel, looking up Israel, that's one of the most utilized terms, actually proper names throughout throughout the scriptures. I mean, throughout the scriptures and the epistles. Those types of things. Another one that would be a good thing for them to look up is the word gods with an S, plural. And that connects you with what your question is. Why do people do these things? That's because they desire to follow the gods with an S, small g.
Small g.
Small g
okay.
With an S. They desire to follow these gods of the nations. And these gods are many. You know, and our people got a small sampling of these gods when we spent our time in Egypt. And we know that the Egyptians worship so many things. They worship cats, dogs, frogs, I mean, you know, a litany, fish. And the amazing thing is that today, most all these things are still being worshipped today as these little g gods. So the reason that Easter is what it is today is because of the desire to worship other gods. When you go back to the scriptures, you'll find that this God of Easter has been named so many things throughout the centuries. She's most recently is Eostra, but as a matter of fact, I'd like to read you a few names that she's been called throughout the years.
All right.
Because she is a she. In this particular case.
And this is from a document from the Cultural Center?
This is a document from the Cultural Center. This particular one is entitled Beyond the Surface, and the question is, where did Easter come from?
Great, okay.
And the goddess Easter, she's been named Ashtaroth, Ashtoreth by the Zidonians, Astarte by the Phoenicians, Ishtar by the Babylonians, Venus by the Romans.
Now you're naming peoples that, you know, they're not around anymore until you start getting to the Romans. Now, those are like Italians, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right.
Well, I mean, you can connect these Romans to the Vatican.
Right. And they're still around today.
Absolutely.
So they might not know who the
there.
Zidonians are, but they definitely know who the Romans are.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because none of this hasn't changed. This is the same goddess that's been worshipped. So, as I said, Ishtar by the Babylonians, Venus by the Romans. And you can connect Venus because oftentimes that whole, there's a lot of commercials and products that are called Venus.
Yeah, they got a planet named after.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right.
So these things are still amongst us. Aphrodite by the Greeks. And surely growing up in some of these public schools, some of our audience are familiar with Aphrodite. That's the goddess of love and such. You know, fertility, because fertility is one of the main byproducts of a lot of these goddesses. Another would be Eostre, like I spoke, by the Germans. That's coming closer up to today. Athena by the Athenians. Isis by the Egyptians. Everybody's familiar with that Isis, you know, because oftentimes we connect ourselves with them.
I remember remember that
wrongly.
cartoon that television show when I was young.
Yeah, exactly,
Okay.
exactly. And Diana by the Ephesians, and finally Easter by the Americans, Western Europeans, and generally throughout the world present day.
Right.
But this goddess Easter was connected, and I think we spoke on with being Diana with the Ephesians, and you find that in the scripture, actually in the epistles,
Okay.
whereby people were at that time truly, they recognized the fact that they were true worshipers of this goddess Diana.
Okay, so you read something out of the New Testament, and now you're getting ready to read something out of the New Testament. It almost seems like the New Testament is there to let you know what people was off into.
Right, and most of the Christians, they reference the New Testament, so it's right there as a testament against them
Right.
to let them know
But it's not scriptures.
that it's not scripturally based.
It's not scriptures per se, because the scriptures of the Old Testament is the stuff that's written in the New Testament is letting you know what people was getting off into.
Yeah, the New Testament is a confirmation of what was already written.
Okay.
You know, actually, I'd like to speak on you kind of opened up with the holiday Easter appears one time.
Yeah.
And that is true. And what happens? People have to really understand and connect with how that is.
Okay.
Let me see if we pick
It's
it up.
in-
We're
yep,
going to go to
in
Acts
Acts.
chapter 12. And I start at verse 1, and I'll go down from there.
Right.
Now, about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hands to vex certain of the church. And he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to further take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread,
Right.
correct?
Now, those are the apostles that we're speaking of. They were killed, right?
Yes. Verse 4 states, and when he had apprehended him, he put him into prison and delivered him to the 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter to bring him forth to the people. Now, in this particular case, you just read from the verse before that, preceding it, it was speaking about these days of unleavened bread.
Right. Okay. Now that's part of the holy days.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Absolutely. Those
Not
are
the
holidays.
holidays.
Not the holidays. Easter being a holiday.
Right.
And that's just a connection because when you go further on in Acts, like I was speaking of, the people were still at that point, the people were later on at that point worshiping Diana at that point. But in here, this really truly is connected with Easter.
Right.
As a matter of fact, in my book, I have a small G here that connects, and it says Passover. So this is truly what they were speaking of, not Easter per se, what we know today, but truly Passover.
But they were telling a story from the vantage point of Herod, because it was basically saying Herod did this to James and then to Peter, and then Herod was going to keep Easter. So it wasn't that, I mean, they were actually keeping Easter at that time, the pagans.
Right, just like
because what people tend to miss is that at that time the Romans were occupying Jerusalem, and they had the people of Jerusalem under siege.
Right.
And so one of the things that they did is they controlled their commerce, they controlled what what foods they had access to, they controlled everything, and they controlled what they could celebrate. So they were trying to snuff out the culture of the Hebrews at that time. And so you look at the mention of the unleavened bread, so that lets you know that the Hebrews still knew what was going on. But then in the same time it mentions Easter to let you know what was also going on at that time. So a conflict of cultures there.
Absolutely.
We also know in Acts, that's when they started talking about that the apostles were first called what? Christians in Antioch?
Right.
Okay. And then it also references Diana, and then we just read about Diana of the Ephesians right here. So it starts to tell you again, it's yet another clue letting you know that there was paganism that they were already trying to marry to what Judaism that we were actually following.
Okay, so all of these pagan deities, all of these, gods with a little g, were brought in with all of the different occupying nations that came in, because we know from our studies, and hopefully you've been, doing some studies at home as well, that first you had the Babylonian Empire, then you had the Medo-Persian Empire, which is like the Russians, then you had the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. So this was the last empire, and we were just reading in Acts with the things that took place after Yeshua had already been crucified. So, we're showing you that from the point of his walking the earth and on, they had already been well into keeping these pagan religions and worshiping these pagan deities. Did you have anything else that you wanted to bring out as far as those deities are concerned?
No, pretty much that was it. The fact that there were so many ones being worshipped that time. I definitely, as we move on, like to really get into the fact that when people deal with Easter, and they deal with the sun being risen, they believe that that's the time frame in which he rose from the dead, and that's truly, according to Scripture, called Feast of First Fruits. But it's all confused when dealt with from a standard point of view, that being generally Christian.
Okay.
I could read something according to that.
Well, go ahead, jump right in.
Okay, so I'll read here, and this is kind of gets into the Council of Nicaea and how they started reckoning that with this pagan holiday and this sun worship. It says that Easter was a very popular feast, and one of the things that they liked, and
it still is.
It's a very popular feast because it was ornate, and we got to understand something too. These rituals had a lot to do with sex. Let's just make sure that when we say fertility, we're talking about sex. And we know that used to be a taboo thing to say back in the 50s, 60s. Today it's rampant. And sex can be very pleasurable. And that is another thing that lured the people into it. People like to attribute things they're very pleasurable. If you look at Easter and all the symbolism and everything, it's very pleasurable. The eggs are ornate. It's a very pleasant day. You dress up to the nines. And when they looked at this, instead of trying to get, when the Romans were trying to marry this whole thing, when Constantine decided he was going to convert to Catholicism and or Christianity as he was thinking of it, they were looking for a way to get the pagans and all these other deities that they were worshiping, these little gods, little g that they were dealing with. So what they did was they said, you know what? Let us simply substitute the pagan holiday of Easter for the correct celebration of the resurrection of the Messiah. And they determined this at the Council of Nicaea in 325 BCE, before the Common Era. And they looked at this to occur on the first Sunday following the full moon after the vernal equinox, because Easter was directly associated with the birth of spring, and not necessarily with the resurrection of the Messiah, because the pagans were dealing with fertility, deities, as my sister had mentioned.
Well, let's talk about that, because I mean, we might lose when we start talking about vernal equinox and all that, because they're not necessarily familiar with these things, and it's something that they should research. But what they do know is that they like to go looking for eggs, right? Brightly colored, painted eggs. Now, is that something that was related to the Messiah at all? No. I mean, where did that come from? I mean, what does an egg represent?
It represents rebirth. It represents rebirth.
Or birth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, because chicks lay eggs and women have eggs.
Let me read this for you. Eggs represent new life that returns to the nature in springtime. The custom of exchanging eggs began in ancient Egyptian times when Egyptians and Persians dyed eggs in spring colors and gave them to friends as gifts. The Persians believed the earth hatched from a giant egg. And new clothes came into the picture as another symbol of new life. Not new life in the Messiah, but rebirth or new life of the Son.
So this was back in the Egyptian time.
Absolutely.
Now the Egyptians,
way
prior to the Messiah walking the earth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so we know that eggs predated him. Where did this rabbit come from? I mean, the Easter bunny. I mean, chocolate. I mean, there can't be anything wrong with that, right? I mean,
that connects you back again, like my brother was stating, to your fertility. We know that rabbits are generally connected to fertility. They're very fertile, and basically we know that rabbits don't lay eggs.
Right.
But they kind of try to confuse us there a little bit with that eggs and the rabbit.
I'm old enough to remember when they used to say that if a woman was pregnant, she failed her rabbit test.
Wow. Okay, I didn't get that one.
Y'all don't remember that?
Nah.
All right, y'all go do some research when you get a chance too.
I don't know about that.
Yeah. That's what they used to say.
Wow.
But then now, where is the kids looking for the eggs? What is that all about? I mean, because you're saying fertility, but they're kids. What do kids have to do with fertility? They're not able to reproduce when they're 4, 5, 6 years old?
Without being graphic, I guess what we have to kind of look into, if there's an egg that's being searched out and there's a lot of little people or little things trying to get to that egg, what does this represent? It's kind of like the sperm and the egg kind of situation, isn't it?
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
So they got the kids all dressed up.
Have the kids dressed up as little sperms.
So in essence, they're basically they're basically doing some sort of a pagan ritual and offering their children up.
Yes. Yes.
To this pagan deities.
Just like the scriptures, Most High tells us not to offer up your children, not to cast them into the fire of Molech, and so forth and so on. And truly, doing these types of things are directly connected to these things. Okay. Directly connected.
All right, now I don't know where y'all.
I mean, I'm sure.
I don't know where y'all are taking these people to, but I'm gonna have to save something, and I want you to hopefully deal a little bit with the cross. I mean, the cross, you see it up on the hill.
Yeah.
And surely that has everything to do with Easter, right?
Well, no. I mean, if they have to look at the very origin of the cross. The cross came in many flavors back then. You have the ankh. Okay, the Egyptians had it. It had more like a handle for you. And then that was formed into kind of like the tau, which looks like the letter T, which is the origin of the letter T.
Right.
Then Constantine, here we go back to Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, he claimed that he saw a cross in the sky at this time. And it was a sign, and as he was given this word, for him to conquer. So this became the symbol for Easter. But it was later given this kind of P. And you know, a lot of pastors wear that robe, or they wear that that scroll, and it's got that P with the cross and
I
all of that.
always wondered about that.
Yeah, and they got a wheel. And it kind of looks like an X. Well, there's two letters. They call them Chi-Rho. And that P and that kind of X kind of cross, there's some relationship with that. And I implore you, go out there and just look up Wikipedia. Look for Chi-Rho. Look for the cross. Look for the P and the X. And do your own research. I mean, because it's kind of deep where the origins of that came from. But we know the Romans, they took 6,000 Jews, lined them up on one of their major roads, slaughtered them all.
So from the children of Judah and the Levites and the Benjamites, who were all in the land at that time, it was constantly being enslaved.
It was constantly being enslaved
on what they call the cross or the torture stake.
And the torture stake is the key. A torture stake is nothing more than just a pole. All right, and to really be a torture, they wouldn't hang you out like this. I mean, you can kind of manage that, but when they hang you, and they put a nail through your wrist, and then they put a nail through they cross your feet over and put a nail through both the ankles. There's no antiseptic. I mean, that is excruciating pain.
Right.
That enough would cause you to.
But that was just capital punishment of the day. I mean, that's what they did to the people that they considered to be criminals of the state, so to speak.
Right.
So it's kind of like today where you see people getting lethal injection. It's just supposedly lethal injection is more humane as opposed to what they did back, or hanging. Right. In which some states still hang.
Still hang. Some still do electrocutions.
But that's really amazing. When you connect those, because we're taught that he was crucified on a cross, and that's not true. Just like you said, it was a torture stake. It was a pole. When you read throughout the book, you'll see oftentimes it says that he was on the tree.
Right,
he was on the tree. He was on the torture stake, which was a sin. Going back to the law, it was a sin for him to remain on that tree into the even. As a matter of fact, let me read that really quick here. And this is in St. John and chapter 19, and I'll pick it up here, verse 31, and it states, "The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the bodies should not remain upon," they say, "the cross." And if you do your research back, just like you have the Lord in here in the Old Testament, that truly was changed. It was previously Yahweh, his name. And when you see here upon the cross, that will be on the torture stake, on the Sabbath day. Let me go back so you can get a connection. "The Jews, therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the stake, torture stake, on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was an high day, besought Pilate, and that their legs might be broken, that they might be taken away." Now, this connects us back to to what you were saying. In being on this torture stake, what would happen is the people that were on this torture stake would use their legs as support, because it's natural, just like trying to breathe, even
Trying to brace yourself.
trying to brace yourself. So what they would do, such that they would not stay on the torture stake living for days upon days upon days, they would come through and they would break their legs, such that they would not have any support, and then they would die. And now, according to Scripture, however, when you go back to the Old Testament, that the Messiah, this unblemished lamb, which was what he was, he would not have a broken limb. So even though it was customary for them to break the limbs, and they were coming to him to do that, they did not do that. He had already expired according to the law, so that wouldn't take place.
Okay.
I'll pick that up at verse 32. Then came the soldiers and brake the legs of the first man, and of the other which was crucified with him. Verse 33. But when they came to Yeshua and saw that he was dead already, they broke not his legs. And so it went on through there. And I want to pick this up. Now, I'll just pick it up in verse 36. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled. A bone of him shall not be broken. Absolutely.
Okay.
You know, and connecting that back with, you know, how we're speaking about as far as this torture stake, as well as that following day, where we talk about the sun is risen.
Good. I wanted to talk about that. Go ahead.
You know, you'll find so many times, particularly here, that people will go on to Stone Mountain Park, onto the top. They'll hike to the top of the mountain in order to actually have a sunrise service.
Right.
Exactly.
They get there before dawn, and then they wait for the sun to rise.
Absolutely. Now, let's go back to what the epistle said about.
But when the sun rises, then they say the sun is risen.
Right.
But the rising of the SON happened 2,000 some odd years ago.
Right.
So what sun are they talking about is risen?
Yes.
Not was risen.
Was risen.
Is risen.
Yeah.
You know, it's subtle, but yet and still, there throughout the entire country, throughout the entire world, everybody's celebrating at the same time. This same day, the rising of the SUN. But in some of the other shows, we've even talked about how this sun is this representative of Satan is actually, you know, depicted behind the Messiah. You see a sun halo behind him, the halo itself, and angels and all these other things, and you have this constant showing of an SUN when we are supposed to be, in theory, worshiping an SON.
Well, Lucifer is also known in Scripture as the son of the morning.
Right.
The morning star. Tri-star pictures. I mean, think about that. We even have a whole channel dedicated.
So in essence, when they're up there on Stone Mountain and they say the SUN is risen, they're not talking about the Mashiach at all.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay.
And,
all right.
And there's nothing in here about doing such a ritual.
No.
Nothing about keeping such
absolutely.
a ritual. Nothing about having a
Nothing
cross
righteous.
to represent. There's nothing in here about keeping these things.
Right. Okay. So we've broken down all of these pagan elements. We've talked about the eggs. We've talked about the rabbit. We talked about the fertility elements. We've talked about the sun and the cross, and all of these things that make up what is the high holy day of the Christian religion. Now, Christianity is supposed to be based in the Bible.
Right.
So what were the people in the Bible doing? They weren't doing any of this stuff.
Right.
Nope.
Well, you know what? Let me pick this up and this is again John and chapter 20, and this directly connects to, like you said, what's going on this Easter Sunday morning. And let's see what happened.
Okay.
Actually, verse 1. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre. Then she runneth and cometh to Simon Peter and to the other disciple whom Yeshua loved, and said to them, They have taken away. But the point of the matter is, it was very early before it was still yet dark, and the Messiah was already risen. He was already risen. So for
I
them,
hope y'all caught that, because I almost missed it. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, break it down.
Let me go back again. Let me read it again. Verse 1, chapter 20, verse 1 of St. John. The first day of the week, this is your Easter Sunday that we're told about.
Right.
The first day of the week comes, Mary Magdalene, she comes early, when it was yet dark. The sun has not risen. He was already, he was risen. Not
Right.
it, but he was risen unto the sepulchre. And she sees the son already taken away from the sepulchre. And she says he's already gone. The Messiah, is already risen. The son has not risen yet.
Right. But he's
The
gone.
S-U-N, but the S-O-N
Okay.
has.
Just one quick point.
Go ahead.
You were just saying in that first verse, chapter 20, the first day of the week.
That's where I was going. You went right to where I wanted to go.
The first day
Yes.
of the
Because
week.
this is a big area of confusion, because I've had conversations with people who say that Sunday is the Sabbath day, Sabbath being the seventh day.
Right.
Now, I tell them over and over again, it can't be, because Saturday is the Sabbath day.
Right.
Now, here, like you said, it says the first day of the week, and they claim that this is Easter Sunday.
Sunday, right.
So it's after midnight.
Right.
It's on the first day of the week.
Right.
And if anybody's got a calendar, hopefully you can go and figure out the first day of the week. It says Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Sunday is the first day of the week. It can't be the first day and the seventh day.
You have sunrise on Sunday.
Right. So that is the beginning.
First day of the week.
In the Gregorian calendar,
Right.
you got that Sunday is the first day of the week. Now, when this says the first day of the week, this kind of refers back to the way that the Hebrews kept their calendar. Because otherwise it would have just said on Sunday.
Yeah. It'd
It would have been so much easier, because that's what the Romans did back then.
Right.
But it didn't say that. It said on the first day of the week. Now we kind of bypass the most important thing of what we want them to take from this, and that is what was going on at Easter time. I mean, it wasn't Easter.
Right. There was no Easter egg hunt.
There was no Easter going on at that time. So let's really, because this is what we want them to take from this. There was something going on at them times,
Right.
specifically, and we're going to touch on some things, and we need for them to realize that the Hebrews were gathered at that time, keeping Hebrew holy days. So what? First of all, let's go ahead and very quickly go to Leviticus 23, because I just want
I
to.
was just about to go ahead and ask you. Yeah,
Right, if we can go
actually
there
get
to
off
lay
this
that
one.
foundation, okay?
So we can lay that down for them, so that they can actually see what we were keeping, as we were commanded to keep. Now remember, Yahweh said in here several different times, you are to keep these commandments throughout all your generations, throughout all your dwellings.
That's right.
Okay, so wherever we are, no matter what time, this is not old time stuff, this is today. We are to keep these laws. So let's start in chapter 23, verse 1. And Yahweh spake unto Moshe,
When
saying,
they were coming out of Egypt.
as they were coming out of Egypt.
Okay.
All right. Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feast of Yahweh. These are Yahweh's feasts.
Right.
Okay. Which you shall proclaim to be a holy convocation. A holy convocation is a congregation of the saints. Okay. Which means you congregate, much like in church. Even these are my feasts. Verse 3, 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of Yahweh in all your dwellings.
So that's what we would call Saturday.
Right.
And as we mentioned earlier, there it says the seventh day,
The seventh day.
not the first day, the seventh day
The seventh day
is the Sabbath.
is the Sabbath.
Okay.
And the first 6 days, you can do all your work.
We didn't make this up. There it is right there.
No.
Okay.
Well, if that was the case, then why does ChickFilA and these other ones in the stores shut you off on so-called first day?
Yeah, they
thinking
used to.
keep the
Yeah, they're one of the few that still
you know.
do that. But yeah, that is their keeping of their day.
Of their
but
day.
these are Yahweh's days.
of Yahweh's days.
Okay.
All right, verse 4. These are the feasts of Yahweh, even holy convocations, which you shall proclaim in their seasons. In the 14th day of the first month. Now, the first month of our year, we know is the beginning of the year, and that's spring. Okay, which makes sense. On the 14th day of the first month, at even, is Yahweh's Passover.
Right.
Now, we know that Passover was that day that the death angel passed over our people. Yahweh gave Moshe and the children of Israel a decree that if they wanted the death angel to pass over, that death angel that was going to hit all the firstborn, they had to paint the post with the blood of a killed lamb, and then they had to eat all of it. Okay. On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahweh. 7 days you must eat unleavened bread. In the first day you shall have an holy convocation.
Okay. So there's some parallelism of what was going on at this time and then what was going on when the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt. And so just once again to break that down. So the Passover was when the children of Israel in Egypt wanted the death angel to pass over their firstborn. Right. And now we're into the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is when they were actually leaving Egypt without sin.
Right.
Okay.
Right. It was an unleavening. It was to get rid of all of the sinful things of the past.
The pagan gods, little g, of Egypt.
Right. Because we've been there for so long, 400 years, and then under captivity under them 400, that we were indoctrinated much like we are
430.
today.
430.
430. Thank you for the correction, my brother.
That's all right.
So 430 years we were in that country. And we became indoctrinated. We started to take on their ways. And if they were giving off Easter eggs back then, you can best believe we saw that as very attractive.
We already read where they were doing that sort of thing.
Exactly, exactly. And you know, and to connect what you were saying is what was going on in the Old Testament to what was going on in the New Testament. You know, this, as you said, this lamb, this unblemished lamb, had the blood of the lamb had to be put on the post.
Right.
It was a sacrifice. The lamb had to be sacrificed, which means it had to be killed in order to give, you know, life and so forth to the Israelites.
Blood for blood.
Blood for blood. The Messiah was sacrificed on Passover, same thing. Right. His blood to cover the sins, you know, of our people. So same thing. And then the following day, just like you were speaking of, being that Sabbath day. Right. Because unleavened bread, first day and the seventh day are Sabbath days. That was the Sabbath day in the New Testament. He laid in the grave.
Right. He was also without sin. He wasn't walking and breathing, and he was without sin, just as they were without sin as they left Egypt. So you have a parallel of the sinlessness of the time.
Yeah.
And yet no correlation to rabbits and eggs.
Oh, goodness.
Not a one.
Not one.
Right.
And crosses.
Matter of fact, Easter is more about death than it is about
birth and renewal. Right.
Right.
Right. Right. I mean, even to this day, I mean, you look at Easter, it talks about, well, when you get the egg, what do you do with it? You eat it up and you destroy it. It's done. It's gone.
Right. Yeah.
Okay? And look at all of the other ungodly things that you eat along with that egg. They have you with abominable things like ham, okay, and all of the other things. And then we have a family gathering around this.
Right.
You know, we've spoken about this in shows before. Why do we have to symbol on holidays when Yahweh gave us holy days and commanded us to be as a one family, a holy convocation, an assembling of the saints?
Now, when you talk about the assembling of the saints, that's something interesting, because what was actually considered to be the Last Supper was an assembling of the saints as they kept the Passover. I want to read in St. Luke, chapter 22, and just pick up a couple of things, because this is once again, this is what you may actually read this in church, but when you read it, they're going to take the Hebrew out and they're going to replace it with the paganism. Don't fall for it. Okay, you got to understand these were Hebrew practices, and these are the practices that you have to learn and you have to do. So let's go back and read this in context and put the Hebrew, the culture, back into what was going on at this time. We're going to read in St. Luke chapter 22. It says, now the feast of unleavened bread drew near. This is when the Messiah was going into the land just before his crucifixion. It says, now the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover. So you've got those two holy days mentioned right off the top. And the chief priests and scribes sought how they might kill the Messiah, for they feared the people. They feared the people because the Messiah was giving them strength and making them feel good about themselves, even though they were supposed to be a second-class citizen, you know, just as you see today.
He was pointing out, because these chief priests were getting over on it. They were rich.
Well, yes.
And they were really abusing
the priests,
people.
as it is today, wanted the people to be held down. The chief priests and the scribes wanted them to kill the Messiah. Then entered Satan into Judas, surnamed Iscariot, being of the number of the 12 apostles, and he went his way and communed with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him, the Messiah, unto them. Jumping down to verse 7, then came the day of unleavened bread, which was the Passover, when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John, saying, go and prepare us the Passover that we may eat. So the Messiah was keeping the Passover. He was keeping that holy day from Leviticus 23. He was not living haphazardly and just happened to be, hey, I think I'll go hang out with the brothers. No, he was specifically keeping the things that were written about him and then upholding the culture that was set out by the Most High, keeping the holy days of Leviticus 23.
I want to read one piece of scripture that
right
ties
ahead.
that up. If they read in Matthew chapter 5, verse 17, Yeshua the Messiah said himself, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily, this is verse 18, for verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no way pass from the law till all be fulfilled.
And I don't think all is fulfilled just yet. No. There's some things that were written that haven't taken place.
Still going on.
Okay, so I wanted to read on. And they said unto him, where will you that we prepare? And he said unto them, behold, when you enter into the city, there shall be a man. I don't want to get into that part of the story, but it says in verse 14, and when the hour was come, he sat down with the 12 apostles with him, and he said unto them, with desire I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. For I say unto you, I will not any more eat thereof until it be fulfilled in the kingdom of Elohim. And then he went on and did what many people like to call a communion, which isn't a communion. It was actually the keeping of the Passover, where he symbolically gave them the bread and symbolically gave them the blood and said, this is my body and this is my blood, take, eat. And what he was doing was, as you said, being that sacrifice, that sacrificial lamb that was a big part of the Passover celebration.
It was a transition from the animal. And the blood of animals, it was never meant, and it is said here in Scripture, the blood of the animals was never meant to cover the sins of man. So he was transitioning. This was the time when Yahweh was transitioning the blood of an animal with the blood of a man to cover the sins of a man. Blood for blood. An equal share of man's blood must be spilled if man's blood is shed. The blood of an animal can't cover that. That was a transition that was going on at that time. There was no communion. It was a transition.
Wow. So here we have the Messiah, who was a Hebrew, born a Hebrew, who lived amongst Hebrews, who spoke Hebrew, kept the Hebrew culture, lived a Hebrew, died a Hebrew. Resurrected a Hebrew. They buried him and said, here's the king of the Hebrews, the Israel. And then somehow or other, they turned him into a Christian. And then they started instituting all these pagan practices. How could that be? What book are they reading from?
I have no idea.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't ask you something that you guys don't have an answer for.
I don't know. I'm sorry. It said if you don't read according to the words in this book, there's no light in it.
Right. So once again, when there was that death that took place, and you read about him being on the torture stake and him passing and giving up the ghost, so 3 days, not full, passed, and he rose again and became, as you said, the
first fruits,
which is what yet again another holy day that was mentioned in Leviticus 23. So once again, he fulfilled the things that were written about in Exodus, and then here we are in the New Testament, and the same things are happening.
Correct. Yeah, he did just that. He became that. He was resurrected on what is known as the Feast of First Fruits, not Easter.
So it didn't matter it was Sunday.
No, it had nothing to do with it.
That wasn't even relevant.
It was happenstance, and the fact that was that was the way it was supposed to be, and that's it. But it's not. He doesn't. When the time frame is honored annually, it's not according to the first day of the week. because we weren't told to keep the first day of the week
Right.
specifically for anything. We were told to keep the 14th day at
Right.
even as Passover, and the following day is unleavened bread, first day, and the following day as the Feast of First Fruits, period.
But
So
Easter jumps around.
it certainly does.
Like-
Always so that it's honoring that sun, honoring sun
Like
day.
a bunny.
Like a bunny, yeah. Yeah.
And the reason that it jumps around is because they went with that Gregorian calendar. When they went to a solar calendar instead of a lunar, it shifted the time off because the gravitational force between the sun and the earth changes depending on the fluctuation of the solar winds of the sun. Therefore, you won't get it consistent, whereas the moon has a constant gravitational force around the earth, which is much more constant and consistent.
Okay. All right. Well, we got to start wrapping this up. Hopefully, people understand the reason that this event took place and how it fortified what was happening in Exodus. So I guess the last thing that I want to talk a little bit about is the future first fruits. I mean the Messiah wasn't, his coming wasn't the end of the story. As a matter of fact, it's said that he came in as a lamb, but the next time he comes in, he's going to come back the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And so what is that all about? I mean, is there some tie-in to the holy days of future prophecy as well?
Well, absolutely, because that's when we start looking at, we have 7 feast days throughout our year. We're dealing with, this time frame is dealing with the spring feast days. And then, of course, we have 50 days later, the Feast of Pentecost, when the Spirit was poured out upon the apostles, such that they were given the ability to speak in languages that other people heard in their own languages, although it was seeming to be one language.
Right.
So, unlike what people consider to be speaking in tongues, that's not what they were receiving. That, again, was some mythological thing that was given to people, in the form of Christianity. So that's Pentecost. And then you go to the fall time. Fall time, we have 3 more, not feast days, but we have 3 more days that have to be observed. 3 more sets, I should say. One being the Feast of Trumpets, the next being Day of Atonement, and the final being an 8-day feast, being the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles.
Okay.
When you look at your first one, Feast of Trumpets, just like when you go back into Numbers and so forth, Numbers 10, it speaks on the importance of the trumpets. Even when you look at Joshua and the walls falling down and everything else, the trumpets have always been important to our people. Yahweh gave us this as a form of collecting our peoples. There were certain ways in which the trumpets had to be blown.
So the culture of the Hebrew Israelites are almost synonymous with the culture of the Most High, His holy days, and then the deliverance and the things that happened with His people back in the days of Egypt, and also the things that are written of the prophets are all tied in to Yah's holy days.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Absolutely.
all right.
So trumpets being, if we're talking future tense, trumpets being the gathering of the peoples, Day of Atonement being that slaughter, being that Armageddon, being that time when the Messiah comes back as that lion, to bring down this evil corruption.
Okay, well, we've got 1 minute. Brother Yemiah, you look like you were looking for something. Did
Well,
you have something else you wanted to say?
There's so much in here, and my memory fails me at this time. But I know it was somewhere around Isaiah chapter 60 throughout, where that gives some future tense to these holy days still being kept even in the Millennium Kingdom.
Right.
That even the Gentiles were supposed to bring themselves to that high holy mountain that will be established after the Great Tribulation. And they have to come to that high holy mountain, and Israel being the priest had to be priest among them. But any nation that decided not to bring themselves up, there was a judgment rendered against them.
Okay, well, the children of Israel are the key to the story. Yeshua was a child of the children of Israel, and truly, if you're going to understand Easter, you've got to get back into your book, and you've got to understand that it wasn't Easter that was being kept. It was a feast of unleavened bread. It was a feast of Passover. It was a feast of the Most High that were actually being celebrated at that time. We're coming to you live from the Cultural Center of the New Covenant Congregation of Israel. We're at 3901A Covington Highway in Decatur, Georgia. Phone number here is 404-286-5869. And we are at The website is THENCCI.com. And if you tune in, you can watch our service live Saturday, Sabbath day at 1 o'clock, and you can watch our classes. We've got a wealth of information on that website, and we hope that you can come out sometime, because as you see, we are about trying to give you the information that you need to understand what's going on in your world. There's a lot of changes afoot. America is rocking and rolling right now, and it's not necessarily in a good way. And you have to understand that these things are about your future and your salvation.